You feel pain like no other pain, and you know that in your life it's going to be very difficult to...
Prince William believed every surviving word from his mother had already been examined, protected, and placed beyond the reach of palace politics. He was wrong. Inside a sealed archive box, officials discovered a private document carrying Diana's signature and one final message addressed directly to her sons. When William read its closing lines, he lowered the page, gripped the table, and realized his mother had feared the very division now defining their lives. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William remained motionless as the meaning settled over him. Palace archivists had uncovered the envelope during a security review of private correspondence stored at Windsor. An archive is a guarded collection where important records are preserved. This message carried Diana's signature, her handwritten corrections, and a clear instruction. Both sons were to receive it once they were old enough to understand the burden waiting for them. The prince returned to the opening line, then forced himself toward the sentence that had broken his calm. Diana urged William to protect Harry, but she also warned him never to surrender his conscience. She asked the brothers not to let the crown, the authority and public duty attached to the monarch, turn love into rivalry. Reaching toward Harry could honor their mother, but risked accusations, private disclosures, and renewed conflict. William kept reading, and the message grew darker. Diana warned that powerful figures might someday encourage division, because two isolated brothers would be easier to guide, pressure, and control. Her documented words did not name those figures, but the warning felt disturbingly close to the life her sons were now living. One brother stood inside royal duty. The other had built his future far beyond it. Somewhere between them, silence had hardened into something neither man seemed able to cross. The senior archivist watched William reach the final page and quietly asked whether Harry should be contacted immediately. The prince placed the document flat against the table and studied the custody record attached to its cover. It proved the envelope had entered palace protection years earlier. Diana had intended her sons to receive it, yet someone had repeatedly prevented that moment from happening. "Not until I know who kept this from us," William said. The archivist lowered his eyes as the prince traced an old reference number beside the final authorization stamp. That number connected Diana's message to an office still operating near the heart of royal authority. Her words had reopened William's grief, but their hidden history was about to force both brothers to confront the lives they had built without them. Diana's final message did not reach two frightened boys standing together behind their mother's coffin. It reached two grown men, separated by an ocean, years of resentment, and words that could never be withdrawn. William carried the burden of becoming king. Harry carried the belief that the institution had abandoned him. Now their mother's voice had returned, asking each son to save a bond neither seemed certain could still be rescued. William understood why every choice now felt dangerous. As heir, the person expected to inherit the throne, he carried responsibilities extending far beyond his own feelings. His decisions affected Catherine, their children, and the stability of the monarchy he had spent years protecting. Calling Harry might reopen accusations, angry arguments, and private wounds. Staying silent, however, would repeat the very pattern Diana had warned against. Either choice threatened something the prince could not afford to lose. Harry faced a different struggle. The Duke had built a new life beyond royal control, yet his identity remained tied to his mother, his childhood, and the brother who had once shared his grief. Diana's documented message now spoke directly to that hidden conflict. She warned him not to mistake rebellion for freedom, because escaping an institution meant little if anger continued controlling his life. Those words threatened the story he had told himself for years. Catherine noticed the change before William said anything. She found him reading the same paragraph repeatedly, his fingers fixed against the edge of the page. The princess gently touched his shoulder and waited until he finally looked up. He admitted that Diana's words made him feel as though he had failed twice, first as Harry's brother, then as the future king expected to hold his family together. William walked toward the window without releasing the document. Catherine followed him, but did not press for details. She asked one quiet question. Did he want reconciliation, or did he simply want an explanation for everything that had happened? The prince stared ahead and confessed that he no longer knew whether the two could be separated. Understanding Harry might require forgiveness, but forgiveness could demand more trust than either brother still possessed. The message then delivered its most painful instruction. Diana had written separate lines for each son, but a handwritten addition declared that they must hear her final words together. Sending Harry a copy would violate that request. Delaying contact would deepen the secrecy surrounding it. William now faced a choice in which even the careful path felt like betrayal. A palace aide entered moments later and handed him the archival record, a formal history showing when a document was received, restricted, and moved. William studied its first entry and suddenly went still. Diana's message had been logged immediately after a tense family meeting years earlier. To understand why her plea disappeared, William would have to return to the exact palace moment when silence became a deliberate choice. The disappearance of Diana's message was not caused by a misplaced box or a careless clerk. It began during one specific meeting when grief, royal caution, and fear of scandal collided behind a closed palace door. The brothers were still young, the monarchy was struggling to survive public anger, and senior figures believed they were protecting the future. But one decision made that afternoon would deny William and Harry the words their mother had left for them. William studied the newly recovered register and followed its entries back to the months after Diana's death. Her private correspondence had been divided between personal representatives, family custodians, and royal archivists. These archivists were officials responsible for protecting important royal records and controlling who could examine them. Letters involving her sons received additional security because palace advisors feared that painful family details could damage the boys or deepen public anger toward the monarchy. The register revealed something darker. Diana's final message had been placed under restricted classification, a security label that prevented ordinary staff or family members from accessing it without formal permission. Officials justified that restriction because the letter mentioned the crown, family division, and the emotional pressure surrounding William and Harry. Yet the documented account showed that protection was not the only concern. Senior figures also feared what the message might make the brothers believe about palace influence. October 1997 became the turning point. A private secretary opened Diana's envelope during a closed meeting at St. James's Palace and read part of it aloud. The secretary served as a senior official who managed confidential communication for the royal household. One advisor immediately warned that the letter's criticism of outside control could turn the young princes against the institution. The room fell silent. Then the envelope was ordered into temporary sealed custody, meaning nobody could release it until another formal decision was made. Charles sat through that meeting, carrying grief, guilt, and an impossible responsibility. Advisors told him that giving the message to William and Harry could intensify their anger while they were still struggling with their mother's death. He reluctantly permitted a delay. The king believed the restriction would last only until his sons were emotionally prepared. But no date was fixed, no review was scheduled, and temporary caution quietly became permanent silence. William felt his anger sharpen as he reached the final section. The archival sheet carried 3 authorization marks, yet one name had later been hidden beneath another security classification. Worse, someone had renewed the restriction after both brothers reached adulthood. The prince spread the register beside Diana's message and circled the renewal date. He recognized it immediately. That order had been signed during the same week he and Harry appeared united at a memorial ceremony honoring their mother. William closed the file and requested a private meeting with Charles. No secretaries, no advisors. The buried letter was no longer merely Diana's farewell. It was evidence the future king would carry into the most painful confrontation of his royal life. William entered the room, carrying only 2 sheets of paper, but the weight between father and son was heavier than any state crisis. Charles saw Diana's signature before a single question was asked. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then the prince placed the document on the desk and demanded the truth. Had his father known that Diana's final message existed, while her sons spent decades believing she had left no final words for them? Charles dismissed the last aide and closed the door himself. His private sitting room was normally a personal space for confidential conversations, away from formal royal business. William had chosen it because he wanted no secretaries recording careful answers and no advisors softening painful truths. This discussion would remain between father and son. The king looked again at Diana's handwriting, lowered himself into a chair, and admitted that he remembered the 1997 meeting. William felt anger rise as his father explained what happened. Charles had been told that releasing the message immediately could deepen the boys' grief and turn their pain against the institution. He believed the restriction would end when they were older and emotionally ready. Yet adulthood had not healed either brother. The prince said it had merely taught them to hide their wounds while smiling through royal duty. The public work performed by members of the family on behalf of the monarch and country. Charles flinched at the accusation. William was no longer speaking to him as a future king seeking an official explanation. He was speaking as a son who had been denied his mother's final words. The monarch admitted that fear had shaped too many choices after Diana's death. Protecting the institution had slowly become impossible to separate from avoiding grief, blame, and conversations nobody inside the palace wanted to face. The king then broke his silence through that private conversation and disclosed something William had never heard. Years after the original meeting, Charles had asked why the letter remained sealed. A senior official told him that Diana's personal representatives had withdrawn it from release. The newly discovered archive record proved that explanation was false. Her representatives had never requested withdrawal. William pushed the second sheet across the desk and pointed to the obscured authorization mark. Charles recognized it immediately. It belonged to a former senior courtier, a powerful palace advisor who worked behind the scenes to guide royal decisions. That official's office had retained influence long after the 1997 meeting, allowing the temporary restriction to survive without fresh approval. William shoved back his chair and walked toward the door. Charles called his name. The prince stopped but refused to turn. "I should have made certain you received it," the king said quietly. William left, knowing his father had made the first mistake, but someone else had deliberately kept that mistake alive. Charles's confession softened one wound, yet exposed a colder truth. An unelected palace hand had controlled Diana's voice long after her sons became men. The most powerful figure in this story was not the person who wrote the message, the sons who were meant to receive it, or even the king who failed to release it. Real control belonged to a quiet palace office, capable of locking away a private truth under the language of protection. As William followed the authorization trail, he discovered how fear of Diana's continuing influence had been transformed into procedure, signatures, and years of deliberate silence. William traced the renewed restriction to a former courtier, who had controlled access to sensitive family correspondence, and advised the household on threats to royal stability. A courtier was a trusted palace official, who worked close to the monarch, and could influence decisions without holding public authority. This man had not merely stored Diana's message. He had decided how her words might affect the monarchy, then used that judgment to keep them away from her sons. The prince felt betrayed by the system he was expected to inherit. That system demanded his loyalty, discipline, and silence, yet it had withheld something deeply personal while claiming to protect him. The former official had retired years earlier, but the restriction remained active because no later, private secretary dared challenge it. A private secretary managed confidential royal business and could review sensitive decisions. In this case, every successor had allowed an old order to survive without asking whether it was still justified. Charles reacted with quiet shame when William showed him the renewed authorization. The king discovered that his authority had repeatedly been cited, even though he had never personally reviewed or approved the extension. His name had given the restriction weight, while his failure to question the process had allowed others to control Diana's voice. He had made the first mistake. The office had turned it into policy. Catherine then noticed a second envelope number hidden beneath a handwritten correction. The princess compared it with the archive register and discovered that Diana's message originally contained an accompanying page. That page was missing. Its entry described it as personal instructions, suggesting it might explain when, where, and under what conditions the brothers were meant to receive the letter. William found another disturbing clue inside a memorandum, a formal internal note used to record palace reasoning. It argued that releasing Diana's words might encourage her sons to place personal loyalty above constitutional responsibility, meaning their duty to protect the monarchy's rules and stability. The statement twisted a mother's plea for unity into a threat against the crown. The archive chamber offered no answers. William watched the current custodian unlock a narrow drawer where the second folder should have been stored. Inside sat only a faded card bearing 3 words: removed by authority. The prince set it down and demanded a complete custody search. Before officials could begin, Harry received a call from a private contact. He learned that Diana's message had been found and that William had still not contacted him. The palace had controlled the secret for decades, but the moment the Duke felt excluded again, control began slipping from everyone's hands. Harry did not first hear Diana's words from his brother. He heard that they existed from someone outside the room where the decisions were being made. That detail struck him with almost as much force as the hidden message itself. To him, the discovery confirmed an old fear. When the palace faced a dangerous truth, William was brought inside while he remained beyond the door. Within minutes, grief turned into anger, and anger demanded an answer. Harry received the information through a private call from a trusted contact familiar with the archive search. The caller told him that William had already read a sealed message written by Diana to both sons and that palace officials were investigating why it had been suppressed. A sealed message was a protected document kept closed to unauthorized readers. Yet the explanation offered no comfort. The Duke heard only one fact: decisions about his mother were happening without him again. William had delayed making contact for 2 reasons. Diana's handwritten instruction required both brothers to hear the message together, and the missing accompanying page raised doubts about whether the discovery was complete. The prince wanted to protect the document's integrity, the certainty that its contents were original, complete, and unchanged. But his silence had created the exact wound their mother warned against. Every hour of caution now looked like another act of control. Harry called his brother directly. His voice shook as he demanded to know why archivists, advisors, and palace officials had been allowed to decide when he was ready to hear his mother's words. William tried to explain the missing page, but the Duke cut him off. He had spent years believing the institution controlled information to protect itself. Now his brother appeared to be standing inside that same circle. The conversation suddenly changed when Harry revealed something through that private call. Diana had once told him never to let anyone convince him that William had stopped loving him. He had carried those words privately for years, even during their bitterest disputes. More importantly, he possessed an old handwritten note containing a phrase that might authenticate the missing page. Stand beside each other by choice. William felt the meaning immediately. The phrase matched the emotional direction of the recovered letter and could prove that Harry's note belonged to the same final message. It might also explain why palace officials considered Diana's instructions dangerous. She had not ordered loyalty to the crown, the authority and public duty surrounding the monarch. She had placed the brothers' free choice above palace pressure. William closed the library door, dismissed the waiting aide, and called Harry back without anyone listening. Silence stretched between them before the prince finally spoke. "We read it together, or neither of us reads another word." Harry agreed to meet privately, but imposed one condition. William would bring the original document and leave the crown outside the room. For the first time in years, they prepared to meet not as prince and duke, a royal title traditionally given to a senior male family member, but simply as Diana's two sons. There were no advisors in the room, no cameras waiting outside, and no palace statement prepared in advance. William arrived carrying the original message. Harry brought the small handwritten note he had protected for years. They sat opposite each other as brothers, divided by public battles, but joined by the same unfinished grief. When William began reading Diana's words aloud, the anger between them did not disappear, but for the first time, it was forced to share the room with love. William had chosen a private residence far from formal palace offices. Both brothers agreed that nothing said inside would be used in public attacks or institutional briefings, official meetings where palace staff shaped decisions, responses, and statements. This mattered because trust between them had repeatedly collapsed whenever private pain became public material. Tonight, neither the monarchy nor the media would speak for them. They would answer only to each other, and to the mother whose words had finally brought them together. The prince read the document exactly as Diana had written it. She urged her sons to challenge one another honestly, forgive without surrendering dignity, and remember that duty or distance could never erase their shared childhood. Her message did not ask them to agree on everything. It asked them to recognize the wounded human being behind every title, accusation, and angry silence. Harry lowered his eyes when one sentence warned that pain could turn brothers into symbols instead of people. Through their private conversation, the Duke admitted that he had sometimes spoken about William as though his brother were merely the face of an institution. Doing so had made his anger easier to express, but it had also allowed him to forget the boy who once shared his grief when nobody else could understand it. William answered with a confession of his own. The future king acknowledged that protecting the monarchy had sometimes given him a reason to avoid difficult conversations. Silence had become his shield. It prevented fresh arguments, but it also left Harry believing that duty mattered more than their bond. The prince had called that restraint. Diana's message exposed it as fear. Harry unfolded his handwritten note and placed it beside the missing line in the archival copy. The words completed the sentence perfectly. Stand beside each other by choice, never by command. Suddenly, the reason for suppressing the accompanying page became clear. It was not a political attack on the crown. It was Diana's private belief that reconciliation had meaning only when love was freely chosen. William finished reading, folded the document, and placed it between them. Harry moved his chair closer, instead of reaching for the page. Neither offered a grand apology or promised instant peace. They simply agreed that their mother's words would never be leaked, distorted, or used as a weapon against either brother. Their decision was private. Its consequences would not remain so. The brothers had finally heard Diana together, but the world was about to discover how long her voice had been kept behind palace walls. By sunrise, a private family reckoning had become a national story. The revelation touched something deeper than royal curiosity, because it returned Britain to the unresolved grief surrounding Diana and the two young sons who walked behind her coffin. Yet this time, The public was not simply mourning the past. People wanted to know why a mother's final plea had been restricted, who benefited from the brothers' division, and whether reconciliation had finally begun. The palace responded with a carefully worded statement, confirming that Diana's personal correspondence had been found, authenticated, and delivered jointly to William and Harry. Personal correspondence meant letters intended for family, rather than official government business. Authentication was the process of confirming that the handwriting, signature, paper, and recorded history were genuine. The statement protected the letter's private contents, but its confirmation shattered decades of silence. Charles acted before anger could spread further. The king ordered an independent review of how sensitive family documents were classified. Such a review allowed experts outside the office responsible for the original decision to examine what had happened. He also directed that no inherited restriction from a retired official could remain active without fresh authorization. The decision mattered because palace procedures had allowed one temporary delay to control his sons' lives for decades. William disliked seeing his mother's words turned into headlines, yet he accepted that secrecy had created the crisis. Harry agreed, through a documented joint statement, not to publish the complete letter. The Duke understood that revealing everything might satisfy public curiosity, but it would also transform Diana's final message into another weapon. For once, both brothers chose protection, without allowing the palace to control them. Charles faced fierce criticism for permitting the original delay. He refused to blame former courtiers alone. During a private conversation with William, the monarch admitted that accountability had to begin with him, because fear had stopped him from checking whether the message was ever delivered. The prince did not offer immediate forgiveness, but he recognized something different in his father: responsibility without excuse. Outside Kensington Palace, the public response became impossible to ignore. Crowds gathered beside Diana's memorial gates, leaving flowers and handwritten messages. One person raised a newspaper above the gathering. Its front page carried the words, "Her final words, do not let them divide you." A national broadcaster described the discovery not as proof of instant reconciliation, but as the first major decision William and Harry had made together in years. That difference mattered. The brothers had not erased their conflict. They had simply refused to let others control what happened next. William watched the report beside Catherine and switched off the television when an old photograph of himself and Harry appeared. The princess asked whether he regretted meeting his brother. "No," the future king answered. "I regret that it took her voice to make us listen." The headline captured the shock, but only Diana's sons could determine whether her words became another controversy or a lasting act of repair. Diana's message could not restore the years her sons had lost, erase the accusations exchanged between them, or return them to the closeness of childhood. But it achieved something royal authority had repeatedly failed to accomplish. It made William and Harry face one another without titles, advisors, or carefully rehearsed defenses. The final meaning of the document was not hidden inside a dramatic sentence. It was revealed by what the brothers chose to do after reading it. William made the first permanent decision. He ordered the original message placed inside a jointly controlled family archive, a protected collection requiring approval from both brothers before anything could be opened, copied, or released. Neither the palace, nor either son, would control Diana's words alone. Their mother's letter would remain private, but it would never again disappear behind a decision neither man understood. Charles followed with an order of his own. The king formally removed the inherited restriction system that had allowed an old classification to remain active without review. An archival review, the official examination of how records were stored and controlled, created a new rule protecting personal correspondence from indefinite institutional control. Future officials could preserve sensitive material, but they could no longer hide it forever under another person's authority. William finally understood that honoring Diana did not require abandoning duty or forgetting the wounds Harry had caused. It required refusing to let royal responsibility become an excuse for emotional distance. The future king could defend the monarchy while still recognizing his brother as family. That balance would be difficult, but their mother had never promised them an easy path. Harry reached an equally painful conclusion. The Duke accepted that reconciliation could not be demanded through interviews, public statements, or pressure. He agreed to rebuild contact privately and stop turning every conversation into evidence for one side. Trust would return slowly, if it returned at all. But disagreement would no longer mean complete abandonment. Diana's message carried its power through balance. She had not asked William to rescue his brother or ordered Harry to accept every royal decision. She asked both sons to remain human when duty, anger, and public judgment pushed them into opposing roles. Love, she reminded them, could survive disagreement only when neither person tried to control it. William returned the handwritten note before their final private conversation ended. Harry closed his brother's fingers around it and said the page belonged beside the original. Together, they placed both pieces inside the same envelope. Charles then apologized personally to both sons through a private family conversation. His apology could not restore the missing decades, but it ended the palace's denial of responsibility. Diana's final message arrived painfully late, yet its purpose was fulfilled. Her sons chose not perfect unity, but honesty, dignity, and a bond no palace document would ever control again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.